I'm Tom Brokaw on the Soweto street where Nelson Mandela lives, and you're watching South Africa Now.
Global Vision presents the television news magazine of Southern Africa. News. Views. Frontline focus. In-depth analysis. Covering the coverage. Cultural features. This week, South Africa Now reports these stories. F.W. de Klerk is a reformer, but have his security forces heard the news? Police torture is making headlines.
Leaders of the ANC, a man like Maharaj, who's been arrested and has been tortured, has been beaten up by police officers.
AIDS in South Africa. It's there, it's deadly, and it's spreading. We have a background report.
The government spends a huge amount on population development, as they call it, which is fertility control or contraception, and really a relatively small amount on AIDS prevention.
And in our culture segment, a new film about a great poet, Gqubule. The people's poet is still rapping in his own way.
When shall I write about the daffodils? How can I write about the beauty of nature when the ground is daily soaked with the blood of the innocent? Nevertheless, the dove of peace also belongs to us in the south. No regime can press over a hot lid of a boiling pot forever.
All these stories and more on South Africa Now. But first, the Uncensored News with Thandeka Gqubule and Phillip Tomlinson.
We welcome viewers to a new season of South Africa Now, the world's only weekly television news magazine reporting developments throughout Southern Africa. Our top story this week involves torture and death. As President F.W. de Klerk announces fundamental reforms, there's evidence that the police are still cracking down on hundreds of black activists, many of whom have died mysteriously while in custody. The Los Angeles Times, in this front-page story, reports fresh charges of police torture. For a response, we spoke by phone with the Pretoria police spokesman.
Well, this is obviously done for propaganda purposes. The police, when these initial allegations were made, police conducted an investigation, and it is found that these allegations are false.
Allegations of police brutality have not just surfaced in the case of unknown township residents. Recently, African National Congress negotiator Joe Slovo told us the police had beaten the imprisoned Communist Party leader Maharaj, who has now filed suit.
A man like Maharaj, who's been arrested and has been tortured, has been beaten up by police officers. We have demanded inquiries by the government of our allegations. So far, we've heard nothing. All we know is that when a similar allegation was made by the right wing against the police, because they too have had some arrests, the Klerk announced on the same day that a general was being appointed to investigate the allegation of torture.
The South African government presented its first constitutional model for a future South Africa, featuring a system involving two houses with equal powers, one elected on the basis of one person, one vote, and the other based on ethnic considerations, ostensibly to protect white minority power. In the past, ANC leader Nelson Mandela, now traveling in Asia, has rejected any system that gives preferential treatment to any group. President F.W. de Klerk has been traveling also to the Netherlands, where he predicted that a new constitution would be ready by 1994. South Africans saw his visit reported in glowing terms.
I never felt that there was any real tension or any risk of the discussions developing in a negative direction.
Not covered in this SABC report was a strong statement by the Dutch government rejecting any relaxation of its sanctions policy. staying true to a commitment that it gave Nelson Mandela when he was in The Hague in June.
The Prime Minister assured that the Dutch government will support the continued maintenance of sanctions.
The man his supporters call the Lion of Azania is dead. Zephania Mothopeng, the leader of the Pan Africanist Congress, died of cancer October 23rd at age 78. Widely known as Uncle Zeph, Mothopeng was freed from a long prison sentence last year.
I was surprised by my sudden release from prison on Saturday. But I am also very delighted to be out of prison.
Mothopeng had recently criticized the ANC for its negotiations with the government, but was reportedly mulling over a government invitation to have his own set of talks. The PAC has followed its own black consciousness political line ever since it broke away from the ANC in 1959. Nevertheless, ANC leaders paid tribute to Mothopeng after his death was announced. South Africa Now covered an ailing Mothopeng as he visited the US last year.
We are steadily developing our own capacity to enforce sanctions against transnational companies or corporations which collaborate with the racist colonial settlers at the expense of our national rights in our own country.
While most media attention to political matters in South Africa focuses on the national level, intense struggles are taking place at the local level. Newspaper photos like this one, titled Township Terror, show the intensity of continued battles, which suggest that African residential areas are still a center of continued unrest. Perhaps that's why labor unions are becoming active in so-called civic groups, as Emily Kasriel reports in this week's Labor Watch.
Each and everyone from this march must tell himself that I must contribute to the building of the people's power in Alexandria. Because, comrades, now we are approaching a new phase, the phase, a new decade, 1990, a decade of transfer of power to the people. Who is going to transfer that power? We have to do it ourselves.
Former auto worker Moses Mayekiso is the General Secretary of the National Union of Mineworkers, the equivalent of the United Auto Workers in the US. He is also the President of CAST, a coalition of community organizations known as civics, who are organizing workers at the grassroots level to improve their living conditions in the townships.
Unless the people, the masses, continue with their struggles, we are not going to get anything at the national level, those negotiations at the national level. We should continue struggling over those bread and butter issues that are going to unite the people in the townships, unite the workers in the factories, and so on and so on.
Workers live in these communities, where they struggle with poor wages and inadequate housing and services. It is here that union leaders become community leaders as well.
The civic organizations or association or movement started in 1980s, where they were organized from street committees, block committees, hostel committees. Those organizations' tasks being to spearhead struggles over rent boycotts, over transport issues, over general living conditions.
These boycotts have recently led to confrontations, with water and electricity cut off in some townships. Mayekiso himself has been denounced by the liberal press, but he is not disturbed by the criticism.
More than 30 civics got together and they made some decisions, and they said they are going to continue the rent boycott. They are going to continue the mass struggles, and also to get rid of racism in the local governments, to get rid of exploitation through rentals and so on, and to spearhead the introduction of non-racial municipalities, one tax base.
In some areas, these struggles have won victories through negotiations with local authorities, who have written off unpaid rents, given houses to black tenants, and made changes in the tax codes.
Yes, negotiations are happening, but they're not just happening at the top. Negotiations are happening at the grassroots because people are saying, we're going to negotiate now, and the way we're going to negotiate is we're going to march onto your land, and we're going to say this is our land now, and we're going to build our houses there because we're sick and tired of having 20 people living in 2 rooms.
Bottom-up participation and grassroots control are key principles for both the South African labour movement and community organisations. These civic groups will remain watchdogs, protecting workers' interests in their communities, whatever happens at the national level. For South Africa Now, this is Emily Kasriel reporting.
I'm Joseph Disho with our weekly Frontline Focus segment. In Namibia, a controversy rages about the appointment of a new Army Chief of Staff, Solomon Jesus Hawala, who has been accused of widespread torture when he headed SWAPO's armed wing in exile. The churches, the opposition groups, as well as members of the SWAPO-led government are opposing his appointment. In news of Angola, as we reported last week, Congress rejected a bill that would make covert U.S. aid to Angola's UNITA rebels an open and accountable operation. Our effort to reach UNITA leader Jonas Savimbi during his recent visit to the United States was unsuccessful. But we spoke with UNITA representative Abel Chivukuvuku, who feels the peace process is progressing.
We agree that the government has been coming positively, but we think that it is not enough. The government has stated its will to accept a democratic system in our country, but we think that this is not enough. What we need is to agree between us and the MPLA to have a set date for free and fair elections.
UNITA defends accepting $60 million in CIA military aid on the grounds that the Angolan government also receives external help.
But as far as the government receives weapons and continue using those weapons against UNITA, we believe that UNITA has no chance but to take up arms and to defend itself. And as you know, the U.S. assistance has been defensive assistance, defensive weapons. But I think that this is irrelevant when we are negotiating, when we are trying to find a solution to the war.
Why is it irrelevant that the world's biggest superpower is continuing to militarily support UNITA?
I do not say that necessarily it's irrelevant, but when there is a war, you have to take into account all the elements in that war. The Soviets are there, the Americans are there. Then we have to see this in this perspective. But we think that all this discussing whose bomb hits whom, it's a side issue. Let us encourage the Angolan people through the MPLA and UNITA to find a political and a just, lasting solution.
But outside observers tend to blame UNITA for targeting civilians. Africa Watch reports, quote, UNITA has systematically and indiscriminately planted contract anti-personnel landmines in eastern Angola. These landmines have reportedly left 50,000 Angolans without limbs.
Concerning the amputees, we are very sorry that in a war situation, this happens.
UNITA has focused most of its attacks against unarmed civilians, and Western journalists and Western diplomats in Luanda have cited the fact that UNITA is responsible for much of the carnage in Angola, particularly as it relates to amputees.
MPLA and UNITA are due to continue the next round of peace talks in November. The MPLA government is pressing for a ceasefire and says Angola could adopt a multi-party system as early as next year.
You're watching South Africa Now, the television news magazine that goes behind the headlines.
AIDS is a killer worldwide. It has had a particularly devastating impact in Africa. But in South Africa, the deadly virus is just beginning to claim more lives. It was first identified in the gay male community, but it is now a menace in the townships and rural areas for reasons that have been linked in part to the apartheid system. Phillip Tomlinson reports.
Did you hear about Kevin? What? The poor guy's got AIDS.
AIDS ads may look the same worldwide, but in Africa, the problem is on a different scale.
It is a problem out of control. We're talking about 10%, 15% of the total population infected.
Dr. Mathilda Krim is talking about the AIDS belt, which is devastating in Africa. In South Africa, only 1% of the population is infected, but experts say it's doubling every 8 months. Dr. David Sifris treats AIDS patients in a Johannesburg hospital clinic.
These are ordinary, everyday people. Mothers with young babies who've become infected, mothers who've been picked up at antenatal clinics. We've seen a couple of men who work as truckers, and this is the traditional route of spread, believed to be the traditional route of spread in Central Africa, and certainly we're seeing that here as well.
This is not just a concern at the community level. State-run television also takes the problem seriously, doing reports like this one.
What is frightening is the fact that the main mode of transmission is through heterosexual contact. The gay community, as in most countries, has adopted a responsible attitude towards safe sex practices. All blood is tested to prevent blood transfusion recipients and hemophiliacs from being infected.
But even as these precautions are taken, analysts say the apartheid system has helped to foster the spread of AIDS. They cite 4 reasons. The first, a migrant labor system which has created single-sex hostels that are responsible for the breakup of many African families.
If you talk to a man who is from the homelands working here, he will tell you he's staying here for 11 months, so there is no way that he cannot have sex here, leaving the wife in the homeland. If you talk to a woman who is unemployed, she will tell you she's having 5 affairs because they are her source of income.
The breakup of communities, the separation of families and so on, which is a result of the migrant labour system, is something which also runs a thread which runs through the entire South African community, if you like. And so we would argue that HIV is a social problem, and migrant labour is one of the social conditions that exacerbates HIV.
Poverty and a lack of adequate health care create an environment which encourage the spread of AIDS and undercut health education.
When you look at the way the virus is spreading around the world, it's pretty clear that poverty and disadvantage are one of the biggest cofactors that are influencing that spread, its direction and its speed. Because, first of all, people who are disadvantaged may have very impaired access to health services.
I was one of only 2 GPs for a population of 1.5 million people. That, in fact, is a place that is very, very lucky in terms of facilities available. Out there in the country, there just simply aren't any doctors at all. There are vast stretches of rural South Africa where there aren't any doctors.
You'll advise somebody to use condoms and the answer will come back, where do we get condoms? They're expensive. How do we get hold of them?
A third factor, mistrust of the South African government leads blacks to reject official AIDS education efforts.
Yeah, the problem with AIDS is the way it is prevented using a condom. It was firstly introduced by the government to promote family planning. So whenever you talk about AIDS and you say you use a condom in order to prevent it, they think it's still a government way to try and promote this thing, a condom.
The youths in schools say, what is there more to life? We haven't got decent homes, we haven't got recreational facilities, we aren't able to go to movies, discos, we don't have money to spend on decent living. We're in overcrowded, under-facilitated schools with lack of facilities. Really, the only thing we have going is free sexual relations. And now they're coming along and they're trying to take away our last freedom.
The fourth factor contributing to the AIDS crisis is regional violence. The highest incidence is in the Natal province, where thousands are left homeless because of a conflict between Inkatha and ANC supporters.
We have to see the AIDS epidemic in South Africa in the context of the changes taking place politically right now.
The major issue for us is that the violence that's taking place, it's a high-intensity war. Now, within the context of the war situation, it's very difficult to go about in AIDS education programs, safe sex practice, and actually bringing together groupings.
In fact, if you go to any community organization, be they political, be they a trade union, be they a church group, the stock answer is, it's not a problem. I've never seen anybody with AIDS. How am I going to convince my people that AIDS is a problem? When any day now, they can get run over, they can get stabbed, they can get shot, their child can die of gastroenteritis or measles, or they might die of tuberculosis or some other highly infectious disease.
These factors, in many ways unique to apartheid South Africa, make AIDS hard to diagnose and harder to fight. In a few weeks, we'll tell you about some unique programs by township residents to spread an anti-AIDS message and what success they're having.
You're watching South Africa Now. Coming up next, our culture segment, featuring the best music, film, drama, and artistic expression from Southern Africa.
Each week, South Africa Now presents a culture segment because culture is often the most uncensored form of expression in the region. This week, we present the first of two excerpts from Songololo, a wonderful new documentary by South African exile Marian Kaplan. Songololo shows how culture, music, and storytelling are part of the energy behind the South African resistance. One of its driving forces is Mzwakhe Mbuli, known as the people's poet.
People use their trumpets to bring down the walls of Jericho. Today we are using our guitars and tambourines and trumpets to bring about the South African regime down. If I've managed to escape the police, it's because I was in Soweto. It's my home. It's part of me. When it's rainy times, it's muddy, it's terrible. And people without running water, using the bucket system. But I like the vibe, I like the noise. Even my tone, my language, is that of the people in the ghetto. I'm called upon all the time to express solidarity and render poetry. He died on the 27th of the 4th, 1983, at Baragwanath. Like all birds do, Kipi did not forewarn us about his intention to fly away. To the greatest giants of this world, I say, fly well, Kipi. Fly well, Morolong. The doors of your nest and are wide open, awaiting the arrival of a giant. That is you, Kipi. The sounds of your clarinet, the sounds of your alto saxophone, the sounds of your voice, and the thoughts of your ministry will have an eternal home in the hearts and the ears and the minds. Please fly back through us, through our dreams. Fly back, please, fly back through our thoughts. Please fly back during our manufacturing of new sounds like you did, like you used to do. Fly well, Kipi. Fly well, Morolong. Amandla.
Next week, we'll have more from Songololo on another dynamic South African poet and storyteller, Rina Mhlophe.
That's our program this week. Thank you for watching South Africa Now. We want to welcome new viewers in Austin, Dallas, and St. Louis. South Africa Now has been in the news lately, and questions have been raised about the program's point of view. Here with a comment and an explanation is executive producer Danny Schechter.
Sure, we have a point of view, but it's to give voice to the range of views of African people whose aspirations and struggles are often underreported on television. Unlike advocacy journalists who take a political line, the producers of this program openly advocate more coverage, more reporting, and more analysis about developments in Southern Africa. As much as possible, we want the people there to tell their own story their own way. Now, this approach seems to make some programmers nervous, leading in some cities to charges of bias or worse. We're pleased that so many of our regular viewers know better and turn to this program for information that sadly is still not available elsewhere. We were impressed when so many viewers in Los Angeles recently spoke up so forcefully at press conferences like this when the program's future was in question there. Their concerns made news because in these times it's so rare to find the public caring enough about what's on TV to defend programs they feel make a difference. South Africa Now aims at presenting all the news and information we can on a budget that's a joke in television. Finding corporate underwriting has proven impossible, and this may be our last season. We still can't get visas to report from South Africa, and the government there rarely responds to our questions. Are we opposed to apartheid? You bet. So is the U.S. government and the South African government. Who isn't? But we remain committed to reporting on a changing Southern Africa as fully and as fairly as we can. We're always open to viewer input. Your ideas, responses, and suggestions matter to us, and we hope to continue to matter to you.
If you're interested in any of the issues we cover, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to South Africa Now, Post Office Box 1907, Canal Street Station, New York, New York, 10013. South Africa Now is produced by Global Vision on a non-profit basis in association with the Africa Fund, a tax-exempt organization providing assistance and relief to victims of apartheid. Once again, thanks to everyone who has responded to our financial crisis. And listen up, special thanks to Quincy Jones for his donation. For all of us at South Africa Now, I'm Phillip Tomlinson, sitting in for Fana Kekana. See you next week.
Transcripts of this program are available for $4. South Africa Now is also available now on video cassette for just $29.95. To order transcripts or cassettes, or for more information, write to South Africa Now, care of Journal Graphics Incorporated, 267 Broadway, New York, New York, 10007. To order by credit card, call 212-227-READ. Viewers are also invited to leave a comment about the show. Video cassettes of previous programs can now be ordered as well.